For more than 2 millennia, the name Alexander has thundered across continents like the war cry of his companion cavalry, the ultimate symbol of undefeated military genius. A young king who, in little more than a decade, marched his army from the misty hills of Macedon to the sun-baked banks of the Indus River. He never lost a single pitched battle. Cities that defied him were reduced to rubble and ash. Empires that had stood for centuries crumbled before the point of his sarissa spears. Greek culture, ideas, and language spread like wildfire across the known world, forever altering the course of civilization. Today, his campaigns are dissected in military academies from West Point to Sandhurst. His lightning speed and audacious tactics inspire generals and CEOs alike. His restless ambition serves as both beacon and warning. Sculptors still carve his likeness. Filmmakers still chase his shadow. But this is far more than the saga of one undefeated warrior king. It is a pattern of relentless momentum born from strategic vision, geographic fortune, iron discipline, personal charisma, and the raw power of never accepting the possibility of defeat. A pattern that began in the rugged, wolf-haunted mountains of northern Greece and reshaped the ancient world in ways that still echo through history. To truly grasp why Alexander stands alone as the conqueror who never lost a battle, we must journey back to the turbulent world of the 4th century BC, to a small kingdom on the edge of the Greek world, a place of hardy warriors, ambitious kings, and a young prince touched by destiny. In the middle of the 4th century BC, Macedon was a land of timber, silver mines, and tough highland warriors, respected for its cavalry, but often scorned by the refined city-states of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes as half-Greek at best. Its people lived close to the soil and closer to danger, surrounded by restless Illyrian and Thracian tribes. Then rose Philip II, a ruler of extraordinary vision and ruthlessness. Captured as a youth and held hostage in Thebes, he studied the latest Greek military thinking. Upon taking the throne, he revolutionized warfare. He created the Macedonian phalanx, professional soldiers armed with sarissas, spears up to 6 meters long, that formed an impenetrable forest of bronze points. He professionalized the army, added elite companion cavalry, and mastered siegecraft and combined arms tactics. Through relentless campaigning, clever diplomacy, and strategic marriages, Philip unified Macedon, subdued the neighboring tribes, and gradually brought the fractious Greek city-states under his control via the League of Corinth. By 336 BC, he stood poised to launch the long-dreamed invasion of Persia, revenge for the earlier Persian invasions under Darius and Xerxes. Fate, however, had other plans. At the wedding feast of his daughter, Philip was assassinated by a disgruntled bodyguard. The throne passed to his 20-year-old son, Alexander III. The young king inherited not only a kingdom, but a powder keg. Rebels rose immediately. Thebes declared independence. Illyrian tribes invaded. Greek orators like Demosthenes called for revolt against the barbarian Macedonians. Many expected the boy king to fall. They underestimated him. Alexander moved with the speed of a mountain storm. He crushed the Illyrians in a lightning campaign through narrow passes, then turned south. When Thebes refused to submit, he stormed the city. 6,000 Thebans were slaughtered, the rest sold into slavery. The once mighty city was razed, its stones scattered, a deliberate message of terror and finality. The rest of Greece quickly reaffirmed loyalty. The pattern that would define his life was now unmistakable. Move faster than your enemies believe possible. Strike with overwhelming force when necessary, and offer generous terms to those who submit. With his rear secured, Alexander turned his gaze eastward toward the glittering colossus of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Geographically and historically, Macedon occupied a fateful crossroads. To the east lay the vast Persian domains. the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from the Aegean shores to the mountains of Afghanistan and the Indus Valley. It was fabulously rich in gold, grain, and tribute, governed by satraps from opulent palaces. Yet its sheer size made it vulnerable to revolt and slow to respond. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with approximately 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, a relatively modest force for the task ahead. Before the army, he hurled his spear into Asian soil, claiming the entire continent as Spear One land. At Troy, he paid homage at the tomb of Achilles, his claimed ancestor, anointing the hero's gravestone with oil and taking sacred relics. The symbolic message was clear. This was no mere conquest, but a new heroic age. The first test came at the river Granicus. Persian satraps had assembled a strong defensive force, including Greek mercenaries on the far bank. Many of Alexander's generals urged caution. Instead, he led the charge personally, plunging into the river under a storm of javelins. His white-plumed helmet flashed as he fought in the melee, nearly killed until his companion Clytus the Black saved him. The Macedonian wedge shattered the Persian line. Victory was total. The gates of Asia Minor swung open. City after city submitted or fell. Alexander moved with purpose: secure the coast to neutralize the powerful Persian fleet, win over Greek populations, and gather resources. At Gordium, he encountered the legendary knot of Midas. Rather than untie it, he sliced it with his sword, a dramatic act that fulfilled an ancient prophecy of one who would rule Asia. The Persian king, Darius III, could no longer ignore the threat. He assembled a massive army and met Alexander at Issus in 333 BC, where the narrow coastal plain between mountains and sea limited his numerical advantage. Alexander, vastly outnumbered, refused to play the expected game. He advanced obliquely, strengthening his right wing and personally leading the companion cavalry in a thunderous charge aimed at the Persian left and Darius himself. The great king, seeing his line collapse and fearing for his life, fled the field in his golden chariot, abandoning his mother, wife, and children. Alexander's treatment of the captured royal family was chivalrous and calculated. He housed them with dignity, addressing the queen mother as his own. Word spread across the empire. This invader was not a mindless destroyer, but a potential new ruler who might bring order. The greatest engineering feat of the campaign followed: the siege of Tyre. This wealthy Phoenician island city, protected by towering walls and the sea, believed itself impregnable. Alexander's engineers constructed a massive causeway across the waves, hauling stones and timber under constant attack by arrows, boulders, and burning ships. When Tyrian fire ships destroyed his towers, he commandeered ships from Cyprus and Sidon. After 7 grueling months, the walls were breached. The Macedonians poured in, exacting terrible vengeance. 10,000 dead, 30,000 enslaved. Gaza suffered a similar fate. Egypt welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. The priests of Memphis crowned him pharaoh. At the remote oracle of Siwa in the Libyan desert, the god Amun, identified with Zeus, is said to have greeted him as "my son." Alexander emerged from the sanctuary transformed, his divine destiny confirmed in his own eyes and those of his followers. By 331 BC, Darius had gathered the full might of his empire on the wide plains of Gaugamela, perhaps 200,000 men or more, including elite Persian cavalry, Bactrian horsemen, Indian contingents with war elephants, and scythe-bearing chariots. Alexander had perhaps 40,000. He rested his men while the Persians stood anxiously all night. At dawn, he advanced not head-on, but in a masterful oblique formation, refusing his left and reinforcing his right. As the Persian left extended to envelop him, a gap opened in their center. Alexander and the companions charged like a thunderbolt straight for Darius. Once again, the great king turned and fled. Panic rippled through the vast host. The Macedonian phalanx and cavalry pursued relentlessly. The Persian Empire died on that dusty plain. Babylon surrendered with open gates and celebrations. Susa yielded its treasures. Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persian power, fell after a daring winter march through the Persian gates. In a night of revelry, the great palace of Xerxes was put to the torch, symbolic revenge for the burning of Athens 150 years earlier, and a clear signal that the old empire was finished. Alexander's campaign did not end with Persia's fall. He pursued the usurper Bessus into the wild mountains of Bactria and Sogdia, fighting bitter guerrilla wars against fierce nomads. He married the Bactrian princess Roxane, began wearing Persian dress, and integrated Persian nobles and troops into his forces, a visionary but controversial policy of fusion. In 327 BC, he crossed the Hindu Kush into India. At the Hydaspes River in 326 BC during the monsoon, he faced King Porus and 200 war elephants. Alexander executed a brilliant night crossing upstream, then coordinated infantry, cavalry, and missile troops to neutralize the elephants. Porus fought heroically from his elephant until wounded. Impressed, Alexander restored his kingdom as an ally. But at the river Hephaestus, the army finally broke. 8 years, thousands of miles, wounds, exhaustion, and homesickness overwhelmed even these iron veterans. They refused to march further into the unknown against the mighty Nanda Empire. For the first time, Alexander's will met an immovable object. Deeply wounded, he wept but turned back. The retreat tested them all. The march through the waterless Gedrosian desert killed thousands. Alexander marched on foot with his men, sharing their thirst and giving away his own water. The fleet under Nearchus explored the Indian Ocean. In 325 BC, they reached Susa, where Alexander attempted to bind his empire through mass marriages between Macedonians and Persians. Alexander never lost a battle because he combined several extraordinary elements. Unmatched personal courage, he was wounded multiple times leading from the front, superior combined arms tactics, extraordinary logistical speed, intelligence gathering, and an almost mystical aura of invincibility that demoralized opponents before combat began. Victory fed victory. Each success brought wealth, recruits, and terror. Yet human limits remain. In a drunken quarrel at Mariconda, he killed his friend Clytus. Mutinies simmered. The empire demanded constant attention. In the summer of 323 BC, back in Babylon, planning new campaigns against Arabia and perhaps the West, Alexander fell violently ill after a banquet. For 10 days, fever consumed him. On the 11th day, at age 32, he died. Poison was rumored, but most likely illness, perhaps malaria or typhoid. No clear heir had been named. His vast empire fractured among his generals, the Diadochi, in decades of bloody wars. Alexander's conquest appeared absolute. The Achaemenid Empire vanished. Hellenistic kingdoms arose across the east. Greek became the language of administration, philosophy, and trade from Egypt to Central Asia. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt, and many others bearing his name, became beacons of learning. Yet the deeper pattern endured. New powers, the Seleucids, Ptolemies, Parthians, and eventually Rome, resumed the ancient struggle for control of the same strategic crossroads. Empires rose and fell, but the geographic realities Alexander mastered remained. His undefeated record is unique in military history. No commander matched his scale of conquest, speed, and consistency against such diverse foes with such limited resources. Alexander's story continues to captivate because it reveals timeless truths: the power of audacious leadership, the critical role of geography and logistics, the intoxicating momentum of victory, and the hard limits of human endurance and mortality. His fusion policies foreshadowed later multicultural empires. His campaigns created the Hellenistic world that later facilitated the spread of new ideas and faiths. Military scholars study his oblique order at Gaugamela, his siege innovations at Tyre, his adaptability at the Hydaspes. Leaders see the dangers of overextension and the fragility of empires built on personal charisma. Alexander teaches that momentum in war and life is everything, until the moment it meets unbreakable human or natural limits. Geography shapes destiny. Cultural boldness can achieve what force alone cannot. And even the greatest run of victories ends when the individual who drives it is gone. He never lost a battle, yet his empire did not Alexander him intact. For over 2,300 years, his pattern has fascinated humanity, not because endless war is glorious, but because his life reveals the dazzling heights of human potential and the eternal boundaries no conqueror can permanently transcend. The boy from Pella who became master of Asia still rides through history on Bucephalus, undefeated, unforgettable, and eternally compelling. At the crossroads of civilizations and ambition, the winds of conquest never truly fall silent. They gather, they surge, they reshape worlds. Alexander showed how far one extraordinary man could ride them. The question that still echoes across the ages is whether anyone else ever will.